I'm Catharine Richert. You're listening to NPR News. The world and our lives are chaotic, and I think we're all searching for some serenity, but it can be hard to come by with busy schedules, personal and professional obligations. I know it is for me, at least. And that's why I'm excited to talk to my guest tonight. Dan Harris is a journalist, an author, and the host of the 10% Happier podcast. And he seems to have figured this serenity thing out. At least he's working on it. And we're going to ask Dan, who was once skeptical of meditation, about the mental health benefits of mindfulness, what his practice looks like, and how we can all do life just a little bit better. I'm hoping you'll have some questions too. What do you want to know about mindfulness in the midst of madness? Is it possible? Or maybe you're already a believer. What does your practice look like? Call us 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. In North Carolina, the matchup in one of the most competitive U.S. Senate races in the 2026 midterms is set as Democrat Roy Cooper and Republican Michael Whatley clinched their party's primary nominations today. That's according to a race call by the AP. Primaries were also held in Texas and Arkansas. President Trump says there were no evacuation plans in place for Americans in the Middle East because things happened quickly after he decided to strike Iran. Several days into the war, the State Department is now arranging some buses and evacuation flights in several countries, as NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports.
The State Department says it's facilitating charter flights from the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, and it has helped 300 Americans leave Israel. An official says Americans should call a hotline to get on a list for potential flights and buses. The U.S. is waiving a law that requires Americans to pay back the government for such flights. The State Department says it's in touch with about 3,000 Americans so far, and about 9,000 managed to leave on their own in recent days. Many U.S. embassies in the region have sent home non-essential personnel. Iranian drones struck the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, where there was a fire, but no reports of injuries. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
Wall Street closed lower today as the U.S. war with Iran pushed gas prices back above the $3 mark. NPR's Scott Horsley reports.
The average price of gasoline jumped 11 cents overnight, topping $3 a gallon for the first time in 3 months. Low gasoline prices had been a counterweight to inflation for most of the last year. But AAA says at $3.11 a gallon, gasoline's now slightly more expensive than it was a year ago. The war with Iran has not only pushed up global crude oil prices, but also caused a spike in the cost of natural gas. That could drive up already high heating and electricity bills. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
Minnesota is suing the Trump administration over its plan to withhold $260 million in Medicaid funding from the state. NPR's Selena Simmons-Duffin has more.
At the beginning of January, the Trump administration's health agency that runs Medicaid told Minnesota it would withhold $2 billion in federal funding over, quote, non-compliance. A few weeks later, the same federal agency said it would hold back $260 million. Now the state has sued over these actions in federal district court. The complaint outlines the ways that the state has tried to comply with the federal government's demands and points out that Minnesota's Medicaid fraud rate is 2%, while the national average is 6%. The complaint says that the Trump administration's move to withhold federal funds is arbitrary and capricious and, quote, part of the administration's pattern and practice of political punishment against the state. Selena Simmons-Duffin, NPR News.
You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Lilly Endowment, a private foundation supporting NPR's coverage of religion and spirituality, and Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
For NPR News in the Twin Cities, I'm Elena C. A push and pull over anti-fraud bills this legislative session continued today when a GOP-led bill stalled in committee. The bill from House GOP floor leader Harry Niska would reduce an agency's budget and a commissioner's salary in relation to fraud. The bill also would require a corrective action plan and staff dismissal for actions seen as allowing for fraud to occur. House GOP floor leader Harry Niska.
If a significant loss for funds happens under an agency's watch, the commissioner has to take an immediate 25% pay cut. If the tone at the top is the problem, as Director O'Malley says, then accountability needs to start at the top. It also requires budgetary discipline. We mandate a 10% administrative budget cut for agencies that fail to protect public funds.
The bill stalled on a tied vote today. Today is Arts Advocacy Day at the Capitol. Hundreds of people from across the state came to St. Paul to talk to legislators about supporting the arts. Alex V. Sapoli has more.
Puppets and musicians roam the Capitol Rotunda, and Minneapolis poet Bao Fei performs a new work.
Because when they stomped over the Constitution, you brought out giant papier-mâché puppets of bears and owls, while plaster dinosaur statues watch from the yard.
Sarah Fossen is executive director of Minnesota Citizens for the Arts, which organized the event.
People who care about state arts funding, who are enthusiastic, as you can hear in the background. We have over 400 people that come to the Capitol every year, and what they do is they meet with their legislators. They talk to them about the importance of art, how art is essential to their communities.
She says a goal of the event is to thank legislators for funding nonprofit arts through the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. I'm Alex V. Sapoli.
Target saw sales and profits decline again last quarter, but after a rough few years, the Minneapolis-based retail giant is projecting optimism about the year ahead. Target's latest earnings report issued today shows overall sales dropped about 1.5% last quarter. The company says sales started picking up late last quarter, and it expects sales to rise about 2% in the coming year. This is NPR News.
This hour on NPR News is supported by Alight and Northwest Minnesota Foundation, organizations committed to the people and communities of Minnesota. Their support helps make space for respectful conversation, shared understanding, and connection at a moment when many are seeking clarity and perspective. Now, let's begin.
Good evening. I'm Catharine Richert. You're listening to NPR News. I get something I like to call the brain zoomies. This is when my thoughts are ping-ponging around between the very mundane stuff like, did I miss registration for that thing my kid wants to do, to the really big stuff like, am I doing well at my job? Am I the parent that I want to be? Why does the world feel so overwhelming right now? I think some people might call me high-strung. I like to think of myself as very high-functioning. But this constant onness can be very exhausting. And my guest tonight, I think, knows this feeling well. For more than 2 decades, Dan Harris was an anchor and correspondent for ABC News. He reported from all over the world, covering wars in the Middle East and producing investigative pieces from Haiti, Cambodia, and the Amazon. And then in 2004, Dan had a panic attack on national TV. And then there was a plot twist. Dan, that hard-charging journalist and self-proclaimed meditation skeptic, discovered mindfulness. Dan went on to write 10% Happier. It's a book that encourages fellow skeptics to try meditation. And today he hosts the 10% Happier podcast, where he interviews celebrities, entrepreneurs, authors, scientists, and meditation teachers about how to do life better. And tonight he's talking to us, which begs the question, if you were sitting across from Dan right now, what would you want to know? And when it comes to mindfulness, what are you curious about? Or if you already practice, what does that look like in your life? We'd love to hear your stories tonight. Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. Dan, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So I bet a lot of people who are listening are like, okay, by the end of this hour, I will know how to fix my brain. I'll sleep better. But in all seriousness, excuse me, when I think about meditation, I think of it as kind of a little woo-woo, and it also sounds extremely hard. I'm wondering what you find are some of the most common misperceptions people have about meditation and mindfulness. It seems like it could be sort of an overwhelming thing to practice in the first place.
Yeah, there are lots of misconceptions. The first thing to say before I address a few of them is that I'm happy to talk about, and in my podcast, we dwell on issues that range well beyond meditation. I got into this wellness, I guess, line of work because I was interested in meditation, but in the 10 or so years, maybe 12 years since my first book came out, I've started to get interested in the broader question of how do we upgrade our minds generally? And that includes lots of modalities, from sleep to exercise to psychological techniques. So just to say, we can paint with a broad palette here.
Because they're all
That's the
connected
right
too,
metaphor.
right? I mean, when people are anxious, they're not sleeping well. And when they're not sleeping well, they're anxious, right? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes to all of that. So, what are the big misconceptions? I would say one is many people don't meditate because they believe they uniquely suck at meditation, that they have some bespoke lunacy, this untamable, never before seen level of distractibility and monkey mind, the zoomies, as you called it. But the truth is that all of us have that. A, and B, meditation does not require that you clear your mind, which is impossible unless you're enlightened or you have died. The whole goal of meditation is just to focus on one thing for a few seconds at a time, actually for a few nanoseconds at a time. And then every time you get distracted, you start again and again and again. And that confers a number of benefits. One of them is that it rewires the part of the brain that gets distracted. It makes you less distracted. And the second benefit is that it creates a kind of self-awareness, because every time you wake up from distraction and you see how wild the mind is, you're then less owned by all of your wild urges and impulses and random thoughts. And so it's a very doable thing, as we often say, simple but not easy.
And I bet when people are trying to do this and they notice, and this happens to me too, they notice their mind starts to wander, they think they're not good at it, right? They think they've sort of failed.
Yes.
But you're saying that is, in fact, the practice itself, yeah?
Yes. What I'm saying is the thing that is happening in your attempts at meditation, the thing that's happening that's convincing you that you suck at meditation, is actually proof of success. Every time you get distracted and wake up from distraction, that's meditation. Because, as I said, it's doing two things. One is training. It's like a bicep curl for your brain that is training you to be able to wake up from distraction, which is scalable well beyond your meditation practice. It can go into your work life. It's your ability to converse with other human beings. It's a very important skill. And the second is that it creates mindfulness, which is the awareness of what's happening in your mind without being owned by it. So every neurotic impulse that flits through your mind, every little thought that skitters across your conscious awareness, you don't act it out like, as my meditation teacher likes to say, like it's a tiny dictator.
Tell me more about your personal practice. And you mentioned a meditation teacher. Is this someone you're interacting with daily? What do you do throughout the day, that helps you stay calm and helps you practice all of this?
So I have a meditation teacher who's a really interesting guy. He's a 82-year-old guy who grew up in the Catskills. His name is Joseph Goldstein, and he is one of the sort of legendary American Buddhist teachers. I do not talk to him every day, although we are in pretty frequent communication about a number of things because we're quite close friends. You do not, like I do. You do not have to have a meditation teacher to meditate. My daily practice is, and this is going to sound a little intimidating, so I'm kind of reluctant to say it, but I practice for about an hour a day. But that is not what a normal person needs to do. There's evidence that as little as 5 minutes, and I would argue 1 minute, would suffice. But my whole life is now revolves around these practices, and so given that I'm allegedly some sort of expert, I don't want to be. You
got to walk the walk, Dan, right?
Yes, exactly.
You are a journalist. I am a journalist, and I really want to go back in time a little bit to talk about your career in the years leading up to this panic attack that you had on the air, which, is sort of everyone's in TV or radio, for that matter, kind of, like your worst nightmare scenario. What was going on in your career, which sounds like it was incredibly exciting and exhilarating and really challenging? And tell me about the days after that panic attack. Like, what's going through your mind?
Yeah, so the backstory of the panic attack is in some ways more embarrassing than the panic attack. After 9/11, happened, I was quite a young correspondent just arrived at ABC News at that time. And after 9/11 happened, I kind of volunteered to go overseas to cover whatever was going to happen next. And I spent many years in places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Israel, the West Bank, Gaza. I spent probably a cumulative year in Iraq. And in the middle of all of this, I came home and I got depressed.
Yeah.
And I didn't know I was depressed. And in that state, I did something incredibly stupid, which is I started to self-medicate with recreational drugs, including cocaine. I was not high on the air when I had the panic attack, so I didn't have any reason to connect the bad behavior with freaking out on Good Morning America in front of more than 5 million people. But then when I went to a psychiatrist, my mom, who is now a retired physician, but at the time was a practicing physician, watched my panic attack, got me in to see a shrink, and he asked me a bunch of questions and finally was able to draw a line between my ambient drug use and my freak out on the air. So it was a rough cascade of events.
Yeah. So how did you then come to meditation after those events?
Not quickly. It wasn't like I quit doing drugs and then my life was a nonstop parade of rainbow barfing unicorns and that was all, Mr. Meditation all the time. Like didn't go like that. There was a couple of year gap. The first thing that happened that got me interested was I read a book. Have you ever heard of Eckhart Tolle?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not, I know who that is, but I have not read, but so enlighten us here.
So the interesting choice of words. Enlighten, I will. Eckhart Tolle believes he's enlightened, and after a spiritual awakening, believes he lived on says that he lived on park benches in the city of London for 2 years in a state of bliss. So I was pretty skeptical about this dude when I first heard about him, but I ordered and read one of his books, and in the book he described the fact that we all have a voice in our head. By which he was not referring to schizophrenia. He was talking about the inner narrator who chases you out of bed in the morning and has you constantly wanting stuff, not wanting stuff, judging people, comparing yourself to other people, thinking about the past instead of, or thinking about the future instead of what's happening right now. And when you're unaware of this nonstop conversation, which if we broadcast aloud, you would get locked up. When you're unaware of this constant nattering voice inside your head, it owns you. And so I read that in Tolle's book, and I was like, that's very interesting. And that explains why I went off to war zones without thinking about the consequences, came home and used cocaine and blah, blah, blah. And that got me very interested in, what do you do about the voice in the head? And ultimately...
And I just want to make sure our audience knows, in your book, I can't say this word on the air, but you call the voice in your head an a-hole, right? Is that right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that's the opening line of my
It's a great
book.
opening line.
Yeah, I'm a little worried I'll never come up with something better than that. And it is true, the voice in the head is just it's often really, really harsh and really, really unconstructive. And of course, it's capable of brilliance too. But we need a way to work with the thinking mind. And Tolle did not have an answer for me. I went and interviewed him, but it ultimately set me on the path to discovering meditation.
If you're just joining our conversation tonight, I am talking with Dan Harris. He's the author of the best-selling book, 10% Happier, and the host of the podcast by the same name. He talks about mindfulness, meditation, and how to do life better. And we want you to join our conversation. When it comes to mindfulness, what are you curious about? Or if you already practice, how has that looked for you? How has it helped you in your life? We really want to hear your stories. You can call us at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. So, you've obviously been following the news here in Minnesota. It has been a very challenging year for people living here. Less than a year ago, we had a political assassination, an act of political violence. We had a school shooting that resulted in 2 children dying and many others injured. And then, of course, more recently, we've had just a tumultuous few months throughout the state with ICE enforcement here that, of course, resulted in the fatal shooting of 2 U.S. citizens, but also just a lot of violence, fear, and uncertainty in general. For Minnesotans listening tonight, I'd love to hear what your advice might be for them right now when people are still pretty on edge.
Yeah. Well, the first thing to say is I'm sorry this is happening. It's awful. The second thing to say is that I take your question in the spirit in which I believe you intended. I'm going to be a little careful around the term advice just because it implies that I know what you need. And of course, I don't. So I'll really frame it as things that work for me in difficult times.
Yeah.
And I'm going to recommend 2 things that have been helpful for me, and they're going to seem a little contradictory. The first is, and you may have heard this expression before, action absorbs anxiety. There's a way in which when we're surrounded by chaos, much of which we're consuming through our devices, we can feel really helpless. And so doing something can mitigate the anxiety. And it doesn't even have to be action related to the problem at hand. It can be taking very small and simple actions in your orbit, in your sphere of influence, calling a friend who you think is struggling, holding the door open for somebody, whatever it is in your capacity to do, that can feel ennobling and empowering. And then the second piece of advice is kind of on the other side of the coin, which is to take care of yourself. A lot of people worry that taking care of themselves in whatever way works for them is self-indulgent, especially in a crisis. But it's very hard to be useful if you are a mess. And so whatever it is that works for you, naps, meditation, exercise, taking a walk, spending time with friends, I would strongly urge you to do it, because it will redound to how you show up in the world. And I'll give you one little mantra that might be useful in your mind, to drop into your mind. And this comes from an incredible person named Dr. Kristen Neff, who really coined the term self-compassion and then pioneered the research that shows that self-compassionate people are happier and healthier and more successful. And the phrase she likes to have people ask throughout the day is, what do I need right now? We often tell each other, hey, take care of yourself. But it's an empty bromide. We don't actually take care of ourselves, most of us, in a thoughtful and consistent way. And this phrase, what do I need right now, is a great way to tune into, am I overextending right now, or do I have capacity to help out? And it can help you toggle between these 2 states, approach state, and then not the fetal position, but kind of a relaxed state that helps you resource yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. That I won't call it advice, but I'm glad. Thank you for sharing what works for you. I will take it as advice. Okay. Yeah, I just was listening. I listened to Wild Card with Rachel Martin. I think it's a wonderful podcast. In addition to yours, that should be everyone's listening diet right there. And you were talking about something that I think you just alluded to, which is this idea of micro interactions that you can have all day long if you want, as a source of dopamine, which can be such a dangerous sport if you chase it incorrectly, right? Help people connect the dots between, like what you just mentioned, opening the door for someone, talking to the barista when you get your coffee, and how that's connected to mindfulness.
So this comes from the work of Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, who's another incredible psychological researcher, and she has found that there is this source of happiness available to us that many of us overlook. She calls them micro interactions, these fleeting interactions with colleagues in the hallway, a barista, the person taking your clothes at the dry cleaner, neighbors on your daily walk, whatever it is, these fleeting interactions, either IRL or virtual, that we can lean into, not in a way that it becomes a time suck, that we can just be a little bit more intentional about. Make eye contact, inquire about how somebody's doing, make a joke, whatever it is. We're leaving money on the table when it comes to happiness when we don't pull this lever.
And is that just being kind, or is there something more elaborate to those interactions?
For me, what's been helpful is reframing it as enlightened self-interest, because it is kindness, and that's a perfectly healthy way to look at it, but it is good for you. And I think there's so many problems, and Minnesota has seen these problems up close in the last couple of months. There's so many bugs in the human operating system: violence, greed, bias, on and on. But there's this incredible feature in the human operating system, which is that when we do good, we feel good. And we can harness, I think, as a species, that's the direction in which salvation lies. And I think as an individual, that's the direction in which happiness lies.
Yeah. If you're just joining our conversation, I am talking tonight with Dan Harris. He's the author of the best-selling book, 10% Happier, host of the podcast by the same name. He talks about mindfulness, meditation, and just how to do life better. We want you to join our conversation. We want to know how you make sure you're being present in the moment. What do you do? How do you stay grounded? Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. We have Cynthia in Minneapolis on the line. Cynthia, what do you want to share with us tonight? Oh, you know what? Cynthia dropped her call. It sounds like we lost her. But, Dan, I've got some notes here on what she said, and I'd love to get your reaction. She says that she read your book, and she talks about doing her mindfulness practices in her car, just kind of in those mundane places that you wouldn't necessarily expect to do it. I heard you talking with Michael Pollan on a recent podcast about, kind of the beauty in those mundane tasks we have to do around the house, like, I don't know, folding laundry, unloading the dish. Well, these are things I don't enjoy doing, right? But I was listening to it and I'm like, oh, this can kind of happen anywhere, right? I mean, maybe can you sort of demystify kind of like the space you need to be in to be able to do this effectively?
This is really helpful to know, because one of the misconceptions about meditation, to go back to our earlier conversation, is that you need to be in some special pristine environment. Actually, there's new research to show that 5 minutes of formal meditation in a quiet environment, or any dosage of formal meditation, you can get the same benefits from informal meditation. So you're being mindful while you wash the dishes or while you fold your laundry. You're doing two things. One, you're doing wonderful things for your brain, and two, you're just, as Michael Pollan says, elevating the mundane and making it sacred. So very practically, how would you meditate while you wash the dishes? You would do your best to bring your full attention to the physical sensations of the washing of the dishes. So the movement of your arms and your hands, the temperature of the water, the hardness of the plate that you're cleaning right now, the softness of the bristles, et cetera, et cetera. You're just tuning into the physical sensations. And then every time you get distracted, which will happen a million times, you'll start you'll start wondering where do gerbils run wild, whatever. Just random thoughts will come into your head. And then every time you get distracted, you start again and again and again. And there, presto, you've turned your dishwashing into a meditation.
Yeah. I'll just say that I really like wiping my counters down. So I'm going to think about that the next time I'm, getting the rag out and wiping all the grease and stains my kids leave behind. All right. Cynthia in Minneapolis is back with us. Cynthia, what do you want to share with us tonight?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Sorry, I don't know why we got disconnected.
It's okay. It happens.
Okay. I live in Minneapolis. I was driving home right now from my progressive UCC church in Southeast Minneapolis, and from a centering prayer and meditation session tonight. And so I turned on the radio, and it resonates so much with me. Dan, I appreciate your words. I read your book. It meant a lot to me. I've been trying to be more regular about meditation. And to the point that you just made about where you can meditate, when I took mindfulness a couple of years ago, a class, we talked about being in your car, my car, and on a walk, and at work, eating lunch. That has been helpful to me. I've had several panic attacks in my past, and so meditation really helps calm my anxious mind. And I've learned, I'm a novice, but I've come to see it as a gift to myself of kindness. And I grew up in a family where I think self-care was not a priority. I didn't really know how to do that. And this feels like I'm being kind to myself, and then therefore I can be kinder to others, less judgmental.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I just so appreciate your expertise. And as the host said, this has been a really hard time in the city and state, and I think we're hurting.
Dan, thank you so much, Cynthia. I really appreciate you hanging on there with us. Dan, I'd love to hear your reaction to Cynthia's comments there, and specifically, about her idea that doing this for herself is helping her be better for other people. You kind of mentioned that already.
Yeah, I think is incredibly important that it's a community service. It's a political act, a geopolitical act to take care of your own mind, to take care of yourself, your body, your mind, because it inexorably improves how you show up in the world. And so many people labor under this delusion that it's self-indulgent, but it's absolutely not.
So I feel like, Dan, at this point in my life, and I feel like it really started when I had children, which was, 13 years ago, I just am inundated with messaging around improving my life, like optimizing my life. How can you be thinner? How can you be maximizing your children's, learning at school? And it starts to get overwhelming. And I think I have these moments where I feel so inundated with all the things that I should be doing. And I'll be frank, meditation being one of them, that I just say, no, I can't do it. Then I just sort of fall back into old habits because they're so much easier. I mean, how do you make sure that working hard at meditation, but all the other practices that you talk about on your podcast doesn't teeter into like self-loathing when you can't quite keep up with it, or you're not consistent, or you're not doing it right?
I'm so glad you're saying this, because I think what you're describing is super common. And I think culturally we're getting fed up with the optimizer mindset, with the mountain of shoulds. And I feel it personally, and I hear it a lot from my listeners. There's an expression, the subtle aggression of self-improvement. And, I think this is a real problem. You're naming something, I think quite important and common. Well, two things that come to mind. One is, and this goes back to Joseph Goldstein, who we were discussing before, the meditation teacher with whom I work. He has a little slogan or mantra or motto that he uses all the time, which is, whatever works. Do what works for you. I like to think of myself as a kind of Swiss Army knife for human flourishing. I will present you with lots of options, but it's really a menu, not a to-do list. People should just pick one or two things. Don't go hard at everything we're talking about here. Pick one or two things and do your best in a gentle way to pursue those. The second thing to say is that I think the Uber habit, the upstream habit, the one that makes all other habits possible, really is self-compassion. And there is evidence to support that assertion, that people who can relate to themselves with some warmth, with some grace, with some ease, are better able to reach their goals. And so let me just say something very practical about how self-compassion can work. And this doesn't require any new behavior on your part. There's no habit to form here. There's nothing for your to-do list. This is just a little thing you can do as you're moving through the world. Next time you notice you're beating yourself up, try to talk to yourself the way you would talk to a good friend. I find this so interesting. We have this incredibly toxic, vituperative inner dialogue, but there is also a ton of evidence to show that we can rewire our inner chatter. I'm sorry to invoke the name of a nearby state of yours that is also a rival, but Michigan has a great professor named Ethan Kross who wrote a book called Chatter, and he studies our inner talk track and has shown through his research that this capacity we have to talk to ourselves in a supportive way, to switch from an inner drill sergeant to an inner coach, can really help psychologically, physiologically, behaviorally. And so I would say if you're going to do anything, start there.
All right, we have Jen in Stillwater on the line. Jen, what do you want to share with us?
Hi, thanks for having me. I just want to give you a little background. About 10 years ago, when I was in college, I took a class on meditation, and I saw the benefits. I really enjoyed it, but ever since then, a lot of stuff has happened in the world, and my main coping strategy has been to avoid all of my internal thoughts. So when I think about returning to practicing more regularly again, it gives me a lot of anxiety, and I don't know how to get over that hump to find the motivation to take the time to try practicing again. Yeah. What do you recommend?
Dan, have you struggled with this?
Yeah. I mean, I know that you know, you're not really alive if this is not a problem for you. What you're describing, Jen, is totally rational, very common. There's some joke in meditation circles. My mind is a bad neighborhood. I don't go in there alone. That's the bad news, that our minds can be scary places. There's some hard news to follow on that, and then some good news. The hard news is, or the further bad news is that avoiding it doesn't make it go away. All of the stuff you're avoiding, it's in your mind, in your subconscious, and it is controlling your actions very frequently from that place, outside of your conscious awareness. It's all in there. There's no real avoiding it. It's a little bit of a 3-card Monte game. But here's the good news. You have more capacity than you think you do to handle it. I'm going to go back to Joseph Goldstein, who is a huge influence for me and has many pithy phrases. Another phrase that he uses is, it's okay. To be clear, this does not mean everything's okay. It means it's okay to feel whatever uncomfortable emotion you're experiencing right now. And in fact, tuning in and feeling it, your anger, your grief, your anxiety, you name it. When you do that, you see it comes and goes. The avoiding it actually makes it stronger. And what we do in meditation is we let it rip, and we sit there with these uncomfortable emotions. As the great teacher Pema Chodron says, you feel the feelings and drop the story. So you feel the physical sensations that come with anxiety or anger, and you drop the story about how I'm going to feel this way forever. I'm this kind of person because I'm having this feeling. No, drop that. Just mindfully tune into what you're feeling. And then you see that it will change, because everything's changing all the time. One little caveat to add on top of this is, if you have big T trauma in your past, this becomes much trickier. And so if that's you, I would recommend that you do this kind of work under the tutelage and guidance of a mental health professional.
If you're just tuning in, I am talking to Dan Harris. He is the author of 10% Happier. He hosts a podcast also called 10% Happier, and he talks about mindfulness, meditation, but also just how to do life better across the board. We want you to join our conversation. When it comes to mindfulness, what are you curious about? If you already practice, how has that looked in your life? Give us a call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. We have Anne in Minneapolis on the line. Anne, what do you want to share?
Hi, Dan. So excited to be talking to you. I definitely will tune in and read your book. Very excited about this conversation in general. Been working on mindfulness on my own, and one thing in meditation that's helped me is mantras. The most recent one that I've kind of stuck with is peace is near. And it's one of those things that you can just shoot through your ears when it doesn't feel like it's very near, but repeating it and remembering how you felt during the meditation moment when you were repeating it, it just brings it back to mind, and that's been helpful for me.
And Anne, I think you also maybe told one of our producers that you do yoga a lot too. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've kind of supplemented. Well, I started up more with the yoga practice that I layered on meditation, but one thing yoga taught me a lot about was the mind-body connection, and how throughout your yoga practice you exist between resistance and ease in some poses, and kind of letting your body exist in those moments where it's sometimes ease, sometimes resistance, and breathing through it has also helped me, stand taller in moments where I'm not feeling so tall.
Yeah. Dan, you mentioned at the start of the show, I mean, obviously this started with meditation with 10% Happier, but you guys talk about all kinds of stuff on the podcast about doing life better. I mean, how do you see practices like yoga or just exercise in general connecting to being mindful?
Massive connection. I like to think of 6 or 7, what I call, I think of a pantheon, like a building with lots of pillars, a pantheon of no-brainers. And there are about 6 or 7 pillars in there. One is exercise, is one of the most reliable mechanisms for increasing your psychological well-being and longevity. Absolutely important. Sleep, diet. I would put meditation in there for sure, purpose and meaning, and then nature and other aesthetic experiences. And then finally, the most important, and this is a data, an evidence-based assertion, probably the most important aspect of human flourishing is the quality of your relationships. And this is backed up by one study that's, I think, very interesting, the Harvard Study for Adult Development, which is the longest-running study in the history of science. They've been tracking families in the Boston area over several generations for about 80 years, I believe, maybe longer. And what they've been looking at is what are the variables that lead to a long and healthy life? And what comes screaming out of the data is the most important variable is how tight are your relationships? Why is that? Because what kills us generally is stress, and what mitigates stress is warm relationships. Yeah. And this just makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. We did not become the apex predators because we're the strongest animal, or that we have wings or talons or anything like that. It's really our ability to cooperate and collaborate and communicate. And this is just wired into our DNA in a deep, deep way. And everything about modern life militates against it. And so that to me seems really important.
Yeah. And, staying on that for a second, Dan, I have done a ton of reporting. I've been a politics reporter in previous lives. I still write about politics. More recently, did a whole project around what is dividing us. And when I say dividing us, I mean the country. I mean our communities. I also mean actual families, parents and children, siblings, childhood friends. And I'm wondering if you see any connection between some of the practices you've described, like those micro interactions, for instance, or practicing mindfulness, and breaking down some of those us versus them silos and mindsets that I think we really are, marinating in right now in our country.
There's a form of meditation called loving kindness meditation, which when I first heard about it, I rejected it,
right.
Out of hand.
Feels like a T-shirt, right?
Exactly. I'm a Gen X male, and was raised in what now the kids call toxic masculinity, and so loving kindness was not a term that really landed in a way that was appealing to me. There's the word loving kindness is a kind of mistranslation of an ancient word, metta, M-E-T-T-A, and a better translation of metta is friendliness. And loving kindness or friendliness meditation involves close your eyes, you bring to mind a series of people, and you send them phrases like, may you be happy, healthy, safe, live with ease. I sometimes joke that it's like Valentine's Day with a gun to your head, but there's a ton of research to show that this practice, which is now really the center of my own practice, can have physiological, psychological, and even behavioral benefits. And so it's very, very interesting. One of the things that it's been shown to do is reduce bias. And so and also there's research with preschoolers, and it shows that little kids who are taught this form of meditation become more likely to give their stickers away to kids they don't know, and to kids they don't like. And so it strongly indicates to me that in a world where hostility and bias are, bias of all kinds, racial, gender bias, but also tribalism, polarization, when we have all of these forces of human nature dividing us, driving us apart, there are these innate capacities that we also have, these beautiful aspects of the human mind and the human repertoire that are trainable skills that if we deploy these technologies in the right way, could make a difference.
I want to go next to Julia in St. Paul. Julia, what do you want to ask Dan tonight?
Hi. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I have a question for you based on your many years of practice, and what you just said about kids giving their stickers away makes me think maybe I know what the answer is. But I guess, throughout my life, I've had a lot of moments, or this is my own inner voice saying things to me like, I wish I could be less judgmental. I wish I were more easygoing. I wish I could laugh more easily, things like that. And I'm curious if after your many years of practice, you feel like you've sort of been rewired in a way that your personality is different, or if you feel like the personality is just sort of there. It's the same one that you've always had. You just have a better set of tools to deal with the day-to-day, but that part is actually static deep down.
That's a great question,
Nothing
Julia.
is static. Nothing is static. We know this. Everything's changing all the time. This is the fundamental insight of Buddhism, and it's just obviously true. That being said, the many aspects of my personality are fully intact, and I retain the capacity to be a schmuck in many, many ways, and I'm, consistently making all sorts of errors. However, and back to Joseph Goldstein, he often says, one way to think about enlightenment is lightening up. And so, or to quote another great spiritual teacher, Ram Dass, who said that over time he became a connoisseur of his neuroses. So I still have many of the habitual thought patterns and personal proclivities that I've always had. I just am less owned by them than I used to be. But again, I want to be clear with you. I make mistakes all the time, and often I make the same mistakes again and again. And what's helpful when that happens is self-compassion, is the ability to coach myself rather than shame myself.
Dan, you've mentioned Buddhism a few times now. I know this is part of your life at this point. Can you tell us more about how you came to this religion? And do you see like a distinction between the mindfulness practices that you do and Buddhism?
Yeah, so Buddhism can be practiced as a religion, and it is by millions of people, and that's a beautiful thing. I have no problem with that. But I think of it, one of my favorite expressions about the Dharma, which is just a fancy way of saying the teachings of the Buddha, is that it's not something to believe in, it's something to do. It's a philosophical infrastructure that comes alongside a set of practices. So I'm very interested in the philosophy and deeply interested, in fact, have built my life around the practices, including meditation and ethical precepts. For me, yes, there are metaphysical claims in Buddhism like karma and rebirth and enlightenment. I have no personal evidence for any of those things. Well, actually, if you think of karma as just cause and effect,
Yeah.
then certainly we all have evidence for that. But I have not seen any evidence for rebirth or anything like that. I don't reject it out of hand, but I wouldn't pound the table and say it's true. So I get a little squirrely around the idea that I have religious faith. I think it's more that I do Buddhism the way I do journalism or do parenting. It's just a central aspect of my life that I think anybody can do, whether you are like me, an agnostic, or you have a pre-existing religious belief set of beliefs. There was a theologian, Paul. I'm forgetting his last name, Paul something, who wrote a book, Without the Buddha, I Couldn't Be a Christian. So I think these mental and psychological and contemplative exercises that the Buddha pioneered can help you no matter where you are in your life.
I want to go now to some comments we're getting on Facebook. These are folks who are watching this conversation in real time. Deborah wrote that she'd love to hear Dan's distinctions between mindfulness and meditation. They are used interchangeably. Dan, I've been using them interchangeably. Yes. Is that incorrect? And yes. Please correct me if I'm screwing it up here.
Yeah, this is a great question. So meditation is a little bit like the word sports. It describes a whole range of activities. There are many, many, many flavors of meditation, all of them designed to train various aspects of the human mind. One of the things you can train via a certain kind of meditation is mindfulness. So meditation is training the mind. Mindfulness is one of the things you can train. And again, what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is the ability to see what's happening between your ears and behind your eyes. In other words, in your mind, without being owned by it. So I can experience a big blast of anger, and I can know, oh, this is anger. I have a buzzing in my chest. My ears are turning red. I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts. This is anger. And when I'm being mindful of it, I'm not owned by it. And it allows you to respond wisely to things instead of reacting blindly. But it's one of many skills that we can train, including metta or loving kindness or friendliness and others via different forms of meditation. Does that make sense, what I said there?
It totally makes sense. And I'm thinking about what you said about anger. It's almost like stepping out of your body a little bit and saying,
yes,
like observing yourself, being angry and
yes.
thinking that is that feeling right now. And this is what we try to teach our
yes.
kids, right? Like naming their emotions, which can be really challenging in the moment, right?
It can be very challenging, but it's a learnable skill.
Mm-hmm.
I think Mr. Rogers said anything mentionable is manageable, or we often say, name it to tame it. And you just get better over time at having this kind of mental acuity, this emotional agility, where you're able to see, oh yeah, this is anger. That's what I'm experiencing right now. This is fear. This is depression. I had a little bout for a couple of days of depression just a couple of weeks ago, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. But just in my practice, noticing, oh yeah, I'm telling myself a story about, now I'm going to be sad forever or whatever it is. No, I could just feel the physical sensations, notice what's happening in my mind, and notice that it changes.
Yeah.
And that's very powerful. It's okay to feel these things. They will pass.
It is so easy to get stuck when things are hard in this mindset that like, oh, it's always going to be like this. I think everyone experiences that to some degree, some more than others, But man, getting older has taught me that things change, It's almost reassuring. I think when I was younger, that was harder to wrap my head around. So I want to get to another comment here from Laura, also watching on Facebook. She wrote that some experts believe we simply need to grind harder until maybe, just maybe, we get to do more of what we love in life, perhaps just before we retire or even after. She wrote a book called Born to Buzz that explores what it means to do this. And she says she still feels like an outlier, like society thinks happy or joy is a reward if we are good enough. Dan, she wants to know what you think about that.
Well, I totally agree that if you think of life as an extended pregame, it's likely to be unsatisfying. And I would argue that if you have that kind of optimizer, hustle, grind it out attitude, if you want to do it really well, if you want to be hyper productive, you will accentuate joy and happiness in your life, because that actually will increase your productivity. And I say this as like a recovering optimizer.
And you're still really busy, Dan. I mean, that's the reality. You're doing a lot, right? Yes. So how is this different than what you were doing before?
It's different because the quality of my mind is radically different. I would also say that I've serially divested myself from many, many jobs. There was a period of my life where I was full-time at ABC News, hosting 2 shows and traveling the world and doing investigative work. I was the proprietor of a meditation app, the host of a podcast, traveling around giving speeches, writing books, and on and on and on. And so I quit ABC News 4.5 years ago and quit the meditation app, and actually then just started a new one. But my life, while busy now, is nowhere near as insane as it used to be. And one of my areas for improvement really is to continue to work on not being so busy.
Yeah. All right. We have a little bit of time left. I want to get to this last call from Mary in Minneapolis. Mary, I want to hear your thoughts, but I'm just going to say we're running up against the clock here. So go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for taking my call. I feel like I've lost in all the categories you mentioned, I'm pretty good. But the relationship category, I feel like I really kind of flunked. I've lost my knack. How does that fit into the idea of mindfulness? How do I meditate on that? I've been in a situation recently of just kind of being alone a lot, and like where do my people go?
Yeah. Mary, thank you so much. I want give Dan a chance to respond. Like, meditation feels like a solitary activity. She's looking for human connection here.
Yeah. So this is very common what you're describing, Mary. It got way worse during COVID. And so a lot of people are wondering, how do I find my people? How do I re-engage? And one of the great pieces of advice that comes from our former Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, is that if you're in a position like you are, Mary, where you're looking around and asking, where are my people? Volunteer. Volunteering is a great way to meet people who share your values. It also reminds you of your innate nobility because you're helping out, which we are wired to do. And so I think it's a wonderful way to check a lot of boxes. But just to say on a larger level here, at a higher level here, that psychologists really have moved from thinking about first physical fitness, then mental health, and now social fitness. And so learning how to keep these warm relationships is just part of our evolving understanding of what helps the human animal flourish.
All right. Dan Harris, thank you so much. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Total pleasure. Hang in there.
Thank
Minnesota.
you. Dan Harris is a New York Times bestselling author, host of 10% Happier, and he interviews celebrities, entrepreneurs, authors, and scientists, and meditation teachers about how to do life better. This conversation was produced by Gabrielle Zuckerman, and I want you to join me tomorrow night at 8 when I talk with Kara Swisher, the host of the Pivot podcast. We'll be talking about why Americans should vote with their dollars and the theory behind the resist and unsubscribe movement. We'll be taking your calls. I'll talk to you then.
Support for tonight's program comes from Alight.